It's time for a Watchtower history lesson. Charles Taze Russell was born in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, USA, on February 16, 1852, to Irish Presbyterian immigrants. This was 9 years before the start of the Civil War, and 31 years before nearby Pittsburgh would have electric power. Russell grew up reading Adventist and Congregationalist books and magazines that were heavily influenced by William Miller, a Baptist minister who in the 1830s used his interpretation of Bible chronology to develop 15 proofs that Jesus Christ would return to rule the world in October of 1843. And when that didn't happen, he changed it to 1844. This came to be known as the Great Disappointment. Among Miller's alleged proofs was that 1843 marked 6,000 years since Adam's creation. Miller eventually admitted that he'd been wrong, but that didn't stop his followers from continuing to use his approach to Bible chronology to craft their own false prophecies. If William Miller's chronology looks familiar to any Jehovah's Witnesses out there watching, that is the reason why. Charles Taze Russell was obsessed with these Adventist theories from an early age, and when he was 17 years old, in 1869, he came into contact with a Bible study class led by Jonas Wendell. Wendell had been a follower of William Miller and believed that he had figured out where Miller had gone wrong, instead placing Christ's return in October of 1874. Why? Because Wendell believed that 1874 marked 6,000 years since Adam's creation. Charles Taze Russell began studying with this group, accepting some of Wendell's doctrine and combining it with the teachings of other Adventists, such as George Storr's periodical The Bible Examiner, and booklets like A Vindication of God Over the Children of Men, published in 1871. When Jonas Wendell died in 1873, Russell took over leadership of his Bible study group. He was 22 years old. Soon he began a correspondence with another Adventist preacher, Nelson Barber, who shared Wendell's view that Christ's return would happen in 1874, but also speculated that this return may be, at least initially, invisible. Barber published The Midnight Cry in the fall of 1873 to promote his views. In January of 1874, he changed the name to the Herald of the Morning and began publishing it monthly. Russell and Barber began an acquaintance, and when 1874 came and went without evidence of any apocalypse, neither man was dissuaded. In October 1876, Barber published an article in the Herald of the Morning pointing to 1914 as the date that would mark the end of the Gentile times and mankind's rule over the earth. That same month, Russell was elected pastor of his fledgling congregation. Soon enough, Russell was adopting more of Barber's theology and beginning to alter it to match his personal beliefs, though they were also frequent collaborators. By this point, Russell firmly believed that his approach to Bible study was revealing previously hidden Bible truths and prophecies. In January 1877, he published an article titled Gentile Times, When Do They End? In the Bible Examiner, and a booklet called The Object and Manner of Our Lord's Return, highlighting Jesus' alleged parousia, or presence. Later that year, Nelson Barber and Charles Taze Russell published the book The Three Worlds, or Plan of Redemption together. It was a discussion on the subjects of restitution and biblical chronology and prophecy, and claimed that the earth will soon be restored to the original state of paradise lost by Adam and Eve. That would be the end of this story, and Charles Taze Russell would be a footnote in the history of Adventist preachers along with Miller, Wendell, Storrs, and Barber, were it not for one extremely important detail. Charles Taze Russell was rich. See, the Herald of the Morning was out of money, and by the mid-1870s, Russell and his father had become quite wealthy from their chain of men's clothing stores. After infusing the failing publication with haberdashery funds, Russell became its assistant editor and began traveling to deliver sermons promoting his personal views about biblical prophecy, planetary restoration, and physical resurrection, what he would come to call the divine plan of the ages. Charles Taze Russell was a man with a 7th grade education and no training whatsoever in theology, history, biblical languages, or any other relevant subject. He was elected to the role of pastor by a congregation who already believed every word that he said. He was a man who had become used to getting people to agree with him by displaying what appeared to them to be a mastery of Bible knowledge. The problem is that the only people who that would convince are people who are even more ignorant of history than he was. As more people began to accept and support Russell's doctrine, there was no going back, because the humility required for him to acknowledge his ignorance and mistakes would have also required him to give up his belief that his dead mother and siblings would be physically resurrected very, very soon. Each new follower fed Russell's ego, increased his fame, and bolstered his credibility. This is a narcissist's ultimate fantasy. Eventually, Russell and Barber parted ways due to doctrinal disagreements, but by then it didn't matter, because Russell had the minds of his growing Bible student movement, his confabulated theology, and experience with the business model that would promote that theology. After all, that same approach had worked fabulously on him. In July of 1879, Russell began publishing Zion's Watchtower, and in February 1881, Zion's Watchtower Tract Society was created to disseminate Russell's ignorance. This corporate entity was founded with wealthy Pittsburgh businessman and Adventist William Henry Conley as the Watchtower's first president, Russell's father Joseph serving as vice president, and Russell himself as secretary-treasurer. He was 29 years old. After securing a sizable financial investment from Conley, they too had a falling out over Russell's ever-shifting doctrines, and Conley was largely scrubbed from the Watchtower's history. Remember, Russell was a successful businessman. He knew how to sell, and what Russell was selling was a biblical conspiracy theory, what could also be called induced apophenia. The disappointment of 1914 coming and going without Armageddon's arrival, and Russell's death in 1916, left the Watchtower and the International Bible Students Association ideologically adrift. They had lost their wise and faithful servant and doctrinal mastermind. But where some saw embarrassment and false prophecy, Joseph Rutherford saw opportunity, because Joseph Rutherford had biblical conspiracies of his own to sell, and the Watchtower's existing machinery was already there to distribute it.